All right. We are, wait, is it going? All right. We are with Jack Peach, dating and relationship coach for men, with a specialization, focus, and commitment from what I understand. We're going to get into all that stuff. Uh, Jack, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Really honored that you invited me on to record this podcast or this interview. It's good to speak with you in person. I've followed your work for a long time, so I'm quite honored to have been invited on.
Yeah, I feel like this was such a long time coming. I mean, I've seen you on Twitter for a long time. You're always putting out really, really great material. Um, my whole thing is, you know, I have never really, it just started recently doing more interviews and reaching out to people. I was always the kind of like snooty person who would, wait for the people to come to me. And I was like, wait a minute, what am I doing? I'm trying to build up my YouTube channel. We got to get some good material to people. And you immediately came to mind. I really think that the guys watching, if they aren't already exposed to your work, I'm excited to give them an opportunity to get a little bit of a precursor in it. So tell me a little bit about, I mean, we all have our, like our industry is such a little funny industry. Uh, only, for long periods of time, the only way that you can really describe yourself is like, oh, is that like Hitch? And people don't really understand it. But I think even beyond the work itself, they're always very confused about how you get into it. So I know you're a married man, you have a son, but tell us a bit about how did you get into this world?
For me, it was actually kind of a natural progression, really. It wasn't like something I set out and sat down and went, okay, when I grow up, I want to be a dating coach, right? That was definitely never a thought process that went through my mind. But I originally started posting on Twitter because I found our corner of Twitter, a few years ago, and a lot of what was saying resonated with me. I was already going through my own kind of period of self-improvement at that time, and I found, kind of the red pill stuff, and a little bit later your own work, and people like Ed Latimore and stuff with some of the first people I found in this corner. And I just kind of felt like I had something to contribute as well. So I originally just started posting on Twitter about, my own kind of journey, my own thoughts about things. And I connected with, a few like-minded people, some of which I'm still connected with. And then over time, it kind of just developed that a lot of my content being, so basically I saw obviously a lot of the red pill stuff, and I liked a lot of what they said, and I agreed with a lot of it, as I'm sure, you probably have a similar view. I always like to say it's like 90% of it is good. It's just the 10% that's bad is really quite bad.
Yeah.
And I kind of decided like I wanted to add to this and kind of add a little bit of my own perspective, because the whole time I've been on Twitter, I've been with my wife, right? I wasn't married at the time, but I've always been in, a serious relationship. So I think that kind of inoculated me to some of the harder kind of stuff that I think more single guys lose themselves to often, if they're not doing well with women. And I just kind of realized that more and more of my content was being around women, was talking about relationships, how to deal with, the male versus female dynamic. And it was kind of a natural progression that once I wanted to start kind of really taking this a bit more seriously, turning it into something that I could, monetize, that it was clear a lot of people wanted my advice when it came to their relationships. They wanted my advice when it came to dating. I distinctly remember asking a question, to try and gauge what people wanted from me. I remember, if you could ask me one question, what would it be? And I think like 70% of the comments was something about their relationship, something about women. So I just decided, okay, this is obviously what people want from me. It's something obviously I do think I have a decent amount of knowledge on. It's something I've read a lot about. And it was kind of a natural progression after that. I kind of started marketing myself in offering consultations, and then switched from consultations once I got a bit more experience, started getting some results, and started marketing myself a bit more heavily when I kind of got past the imposter syndrome as well, which was definitely there when I first started. like, how can I actually help people? I'm just some dude. Like, yeah, I'm in a relationship. I am married, but lots of people are in relationships. Lots of people are married. Like, can I really help people? But once I started getting results and seeing that I could help people, it kind of, I was like, okay, I think I can make something of this. And I kind of went all in about a year ago now.
Okay.
And I've been doing it full time since I think last April or last May, in 2021. So yeah, it was a slow and steady progression over about 3 or 4 years before I got to this point.
Well, congrats on your first full year. That's
thank you.
It's a great marker. So, I know that for myself, I started to, because you mentioned how you read, you were reading some books and that kind of pulled you down the direction, and then you sort of saw, oh wait, I have competence in this. People are, need help in this area. I'm going to add my voice. Speaking very plainly, because I know this was 100% the case for me. Did you, what kind of stuff, first off, were you reading? And, prior to even the red pill stuff. And did you get into this stuff because you had some struggles with women yourself, or did you kind of feel like you always had a pretty good handle on things, but you were just drawn to the material, looking to take it to the next level?
So on that latter point, like, I've always been someone who's done quite well with women. It's never been something I really struggled with. Like, I had my first girlfriend when I was like 6 years old, like, in primary school. And I've always got on quite well with women. I realize in hindsight now I did have problems, right? So I was always able to get women attracted to me, and was able to get on well with women. But I did have problems in sort of my late teens, early 20s, with actually translating that into something meaningful, right? I wasn't able to get into a relationship until I was about 21, and I had some problems. I actually had some sexual shame, I think. That was something that I had to work through. So in terms of like the actual basics, I was pretty good, but I had my own pretty significant problems that needed help with. And I managed to figure them out my own kind of path. Probably not the best way of doing it in hindsight. Could have been a lot smoother, a lot healthier, I think. But I did manage to overcome it. In terms of the books, a lot of what actually informed my own opinion is actually from my dad. So I was quite lucky that my parents are married, they're still married. But my dad is very kind of left-wing leaning. He would probably consider himself a Marxist. But I was very lucky in the fact that he never subscribed to feminism and always thought feminism was a load of crap. So I kind of always grew up with actually kind of a slightly red pill mindset. Like, my parents had a good relationship, right? But it's not like, but my dad would always criticize, feminism and say, well, what a load of rubbish this was, and how we already had quite a good understanding there. Oh, it cut out.
Yeah, it was weird. You were saying, but your father always said that feminism was a load of rubbish.
Yeah, he never subscribed to that, luckily, and he always taught me kind of, like, as I said, they had a good relationship, my parents, but he always taught me, okay, this is actually what women are really like, right? It was like, women are a certain way. If you do this, they're going to like you. If you don't do this, they're not going to like you. So I already had that kind of foundation, so when I kind of encountered red pill thinking, a lot of it was like, yeah, this is what I believe. And I think in Britain, growing up in a more kind of working class environment, people in general are pretty red pill.
Yeah.
Like in Britain, it's like there is the liberal kind of elite, university style people, but like most people growing up in Britain are very red pill. It's like there's none of this. Most people don't agree with feminism. Let's put it that way. And like within reason, right? People believe that women should be able to work and stuff, right? But they don't, they don't believe this all like men and women are exactly the same. It's like, of course, that's ridiculous. Yeah, and in terms of books, though, literature. The one that really sticks out to me was I always really resonated with Tell Your Son This Is Work when I first found this space. Not books, but his blog. But again, there was always reservations with some of his things. And I will say about is I think he has developed with time. He's one of the people that I do think has actually become more mature in his outlook compared to his early stuff, I think, his early writing, but compared to maybe some others who haven't. But I won't mention any names, but I'm sure you're aware of who I'm referring to.
Oh yeah. No, I believe it with IM. I mean, he blocked me ages ago so I haven't been able to see it, but it's always a good barometer that stuff occurred, because when you see stuff continue to get like over tweeted in the timeline, that's an indication that there's still relevance.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and to be honest, I mean, if you're not growing and expanding your ideas, it's hard to stay relevant. I mean, we're creating this sort of new consciousness, this new zeitgeist, but we're also, it's also coming on its own. Like, you maybe want to get ahead of it and help to direct it, but that's why there are these other individuals who are, honestly, I almost find it, what's the point in even continuing to talk about them? Because as time goes on, they become more and more irrelevant. That's my perspective. At any rate, though, well, that's interesting. So you already had unlike many of the people who come into the manosphere who are, boys looking for direction, you already actually had a lot of that stuff on a visceral level, it sounds like, and that a lot of this has been sort of developing a greater sophistication around it. Would you say that's right?
Yeah, I'd say so. And I think as well, that's why my content around kind of women always kind of resonated with people who are a bit, had a more nuanced perspective. They could kind of see that, because I could see the truth in what a lot of people are saying, but then it was like, but there's always this context that is missing in particularly the more red pill stuff that I think now has shifted a lot in our space. You don't really see those kind of they're almost caricatured now. I think those kind of more red pill tropes. I think people kind of see it. I think it wasn't, and I don't want to disparage it too much, because a bunch of my clients have gone through the red pill stuff, and I think it's a really essential like stepping stone for people if you have been treated bad by women, or you are, blue pill, as the saying goes. I think it can, or if you are kind of more the nice guy persona, right? I think it can be something that really, really is valuable to go through that process. It's just when people get stuck in it, then I think it can be quite harmful, and it's going to sabotage your relationships in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things with it, I totally agree with you. I actually, so you have people who evolve beyond it, and then you have, these accounts, and maybe they're not as popular as they used to be, but there's always, like, even if you were to humiliate one of these accounts and, they disappear, happens all the time on Twitter, you're going to get like another one saying the exact same shit, simply built different. It's like, oh yeah, simply built different, like the same 400 accounts that said the exact same shit in the exact same way before you. Even still, I've always kind of looked at the manosphere, especially the Twitter manosphere, as kind of like a locker room. And a locker room, maybe you do have like the coach, the wise guy who comes in there, but you also have just a bunch of fucking idiot teenagers, and that's so much of the community, and I say it in a loving way. There is this stepping stone process that a lot of guys get funneled out of the world, the normie space, so to speak, and then they land on some of this flotsam and jetsam in the water. But a lot of them don't know how to swim, and they just, hanging onto the wreckage. So, yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. So, tell me about, you grew up, I'm interested in this, like growing up and kind of working class UK. What were the kind of dynamics that you saw between men and women? And also just, I know that, you mentioned that you had a very like red pill, it was obviously a very like red pill, no bullshit kind of environment. But I'm curious, you must still have some contacts, even if you're not as close with people from back then now. I'm interested to see how things have changed in in that environment, because how old are you?
I'm 28.
You're 28, yeah. So even over the last 10 years, there's been some massive shifts. So what have you noticed?
So I will add the context that I've not lived in the UK since I was 22. So it's a little bit hard to say what it's actually like on the ground there. Even though before COVID, I visited back every year, but for a month a year or whatever. But it's different when you're living somewhere compared to just there for a little while. In terms of growing up, there was, in the environment I grew up in, and I was kind of, I would say, like lower middle class, and I kind of straddled the line between the working class and the middle class people. So I was like in the poorest part of a good area, if you know what I mean. When it's what we call an ex-council estate in the UK, which is, council estates are basically like the public housing, but in the 80s they were all sold off to private housing. But in general, these areas are still considered, more working class, and they kind of have a reputation about them. So I lived in the only council estate or ex-council estate in a reasonably nice area. So it was like we had both worlds, if you know what I mean, and there was some tension there between that. But the actual dynamics, most of my friends are in relationships. So one thing I will say is that I think most of my friends have been very resistant to feminism because of the way we grew up, and those kind of people would always laugh at it, think it's like, stupid, and kind of like the more liberal ideas. Most of my friends are like they're not like, they wouldn't be considered based on Twitter, but compared to like most people, they're pretty based. They're not falling for the corporate, the cultural narratives or whatever the zeitgeist is. The actual, it's not really the zeitgeist, what the cultural programming of the day is. They're pretty resistant to that. And virtually all my friends are in relationships and have been in relationships with the same person for a significant amount of time. And I do think it is because they are resistant to those trends. Whereas I think people who do get more caught up in it, they're the people who really struggle with relationships. Obviously, there's other aspects, home life and childhood, etc. But I think in general, from the people that I stay in contact with, and there probably is an element of selection bias there, that the people I tend to have stayed in contact with are those kind of people because we have similar vibes. But it's definitely still there. I don't know how much the shift is. I just can't comment on it because I'm not out, interacting with people in the UK in day to day. So
now they're all, you said that they're all in relationships, and most of them have been in the same kind of relationship for years.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. So were you part of more of like a religious community?
No, so I grew up an atheist. So I was, all my friends none of them are religious. Actually, growing up in the UK, I actually found God during the process of the kind of red pill self-improvement process. And my wife is Christian as well, which was a big part of that. And but growing up, UK is secular, so like it's not like America, where even though it's a developed Western country, there's still a real good religious base to America, and not like the Catholic countries, I think, in Europe. places like Italy, France, Spain, I think religion is still more important, even though it's, you know, declining. In the UK, like I was never exposed to religion.
Yeah.
It was very much, you know, religion is a relic of the past. It's foolish. Everybody's, you know, everybody who's religious is being oppressed, and it was very much like this was very much the norm. And yeah, I even remember actually like growing up, there was one Christian kid in our school who was, you know, kind of overtly Christian, and he got bullied a lot. I'll be honest. Because of that, and he was a bit of a nerd as well. To be honest, he didn't make things easy for himself, but that isn't to excuse it. But like it, you know, his brother didn't get the same level. Let's put it that way. You know, even though they're both Christian. So, once I came out here, it was actually the first time I came to Indonesia, where I now live. That was kind of a red pill moment with regards to religion, because Indonesia, for people that don't aware, it's the biggest Muslim country in the world with the biggest population of Muslims, and it's quite a tolerant Islamic country. It's not Sharia law or anything. Some parts are, but one part. But when I came here, everyone is religious, right? There's no such thing as an atheist in Indonesia. Much as the same way in England, there's no such thing as a Christian,
right,
in England growing up. And one of the things that was really kind of a red pill moment or a light bulb moment for me was when I kind of saw that everyone here is kind of happy. Like, and I kind of came here and I'd grown up being told that everyone in religious countries was oppressed and they wanted to throw off the oppression, and women hated it. You know, it was so, it curtailed their freedom so much that they just couldn't cope with that. And then, you know, I came here and, you know, everyone's in a relationship, everyone's pretty happy. There's young families with kids smiling, laughing on the street. And it was kind of like, huh, everyone I know back in England's depressed.
yeah,
What's going on here? And it was one of those moments that really shifted my view towards religion. I was already kind of shifting anyway. I was more agnostic. I grew up very atheist. I was more agnostic at that point. But that was, I distinctly remember having that kind of epiphany and it being quite shocking to me. Not shocking, but it was quite an eye-opening moment.
right. You know, the sense of community and the grounding in rituals and holidays and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That's been one of the things that for me has always been so, I think, noteworthy, and that I like to try to lean more into as time goes on, because you understand how much that stuff just roots you, grounds you. And I think that's like a big way to describe what's happened to the Western world, is it's uprooted. Doesn't,
Absolutely.
you know, and so if you don't have any roots, then a plant dies if it doesn't have roots eventually, right? It can live maybe a couple hours, maybe even a few days, but it'll die. So, you know, maybe we're seeing that right now, but but so this is interesting. So with what have you seen with the guys who you've worked with and talked to today? Because there's been, you know, we see all these changes happening, and we see the collapse, and you know, this uprootedness, and you know, you were mentioning even, oh, it's declining, this religiosity declining, and that's certainly been the trend. I mean, throughout our entire lives. But I wonder if we're at a turning point with that, and I'm wondering what you see. Have you? I mean, I know there's a level of selection bias, obviously, because we're in this community, but then there's also the question, the fact that the community even exists. Like, there's demand for it. So I don't know. I'm curious. What have you seen with guys? They come to you for help. Are they religious, or do they become more religious in the process?
Overwhelmingly, my clients are already religious, or so I actually have a lot of Hindu clients as well. I deal with a lot of a significant proportion of my clients are Indian, either first generation or expat, or even still in India. And the other significant proportion are Christian. And then after that, I do have a lot of clients who are maybe were liberal, or have had a similar path to me, where they've been liberal and they're either open to the idea of finding religion or on that journey to some degree. So again, I will add, that element of selection bias there, and also like obviously my messaging and the things I talk about is going to appeal to those kind of people. It's going to be very surprising if I have some hyper liberal feminists following my account. The only reason they're following me is because they want to troll me, because it's just I'm not speaking to them. So I always get worried about kind of how much of this is actually the wider general trends. But I do believe that there's definitely a pushback against modernity. I think that's definitely true. And maybe we've kind of reached the bottom, and we're at the bottom at the moment. I believe we're at the bottom. We've bottomed out in terms of how much we've moved away from our culture, away from religion, away from what I would consider biological realities. And I think the change was already happening, but I think especially as, this economic, the economic systems on life support at the moment, it's the crash hasn't come, but it's very clear that it's coming. And as that does come, there is gonna be, those luxury beliefs which you can maintain during times of prosperity, where you can claim, that everyone's equal and everything's fine, and that women can do the same as men. When reality hits, I think this is one of the reasons why places like Indonesia and developing countries, third world countries, whatever you want to say, are more resistant, is because they have to deal with the realities of life much more. Yeah. Here in Indonesia, like death is like in the UK, if you know someone young who's died, it's like an aberration. There's a really great story, like I'll give the kind of, hopefully will illustrate this point. When I was a kid growing up, there was a girl who died in my school of cancer, right? And she passed away from cancer. And this was like this huge tragedy. We had like a vigil every year on the day of her death, or her birthday, I forget which, to kind of commemorate her. And it was like, there was the only person who passed away in the school. And it was like a really big deal. When I was working in Thailand, which is reasonably developed for Asia, actually. But when I was working, and there is some cultural context here, which is different as well. But a kid, like 3 kids died while I was teaching at a school. And like I was there for like 18 months. Like, and it's just that awareness of the reality of life is that it does end, that tragedies do happen. I think really grounds people and gives people a sense that, you can have these luxury beliefs, but in reality, like, reality is just going to come knocking. Yeah. And it's definitely the same here, where there is a lot of poverty in Indonesia, way more than in Thailand. And it's just, if you go around and say like, women are the same as men, or that like, like there was a big deal about a transsexual politician here, and there was like literal riots in the streets. It was like, no, like we're not accepting this, right? And these kind of luxury beliefs get taken away when you're faced with the reality of life, which is you're faced with the fact that if you don't go out and your husband doesn't go out and work, you're literally going to starve. You're not going to have anything to eat, right? You're going to have nowhere to live. You have to go out and do that. And there's no daycare to take care of your kids here, right? You can't. The woman's got to be at home to look after the kids, and the man's got to go out and work. It's like there's no systems in place that kind of separate you from that reality. It's just, this is how things have to be. And I do think as the economic kind of system changes, and like for the worse, by the way, I'm not saying that's better, like with the prosperity is good. It brings a lot of advantages, just everything has second order effects and blah, blah, blah. Sure. I do think that that's going to come crashing down. I think we've bottomed out. there's already an upswing towards more more religious, more well-grounded, more rooted in tradition, more rooted in reality. But I think that's going to really, accelerate over the next couple of years. Like the cost of living, like in the UK, is like unbelievable what's happened in the past year. Like I'm not living there, but like food prices have gone up, according to my parents, 30 to 40%. Energy prices have just doubled.
Yep, and they're going to double again.
Yep, and you're going to get to a similar position in the West, which it already exists here, where I live in Indonesia, which is a very two-tier system of the elite and then the hyper poor. And I think there's always been poor people in the West, and there's always been like an underclass for a while, but it's very much most people live pretty well. Like your basic shopping in the UK consists of what would be luxuries in the rest of the world, right? That's just a basic weekly shop. So that's going to change, I think. And as it does, I think some of these realities are going to come back, and these luxury beliefs are going to be kicked to the side of the road.
Now, how do you see this reconstituting occur, in the sense of, so one of the big perpetual kind of tensions you see in our space is this tradism, right? Which is, the way things were was the right way. We got to go back. And then you have, on the other end, people who are, and I think you can bring a lot of the crypto space into this, which is, that stuff is, like this is all corrupt and this is all falling apart. But we need to, like, technology is always the way forward, and we need to build out financial systems based on the blockchain, right? Like financially, for instance, you have like the gold silver versus Bitcoin Ethereum people, but it's obviously much deeper than that. In the context of relationships, how do you see that playing out? Because you have, like you mentioned with this in Indonesia, transvestite politician causes riots, and so then you have this tension of, well, is how do I put this? When it comes to progress, is all this stuff just like straight up degeneracy? It's all crap. Get rid of all of it and go back, and or is it that, because you're a nuanced guy, is there some integration of this that leads us to like more of a, I'm curious where you think it's going to go, because when the pendulum swings, it can swing like a scythe.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I don't 100% know where it's gonna go, but like I'm definitely not one of the people who believes that like we should just turn back the clock and like it's everything 100 years ago was hunky dory. Obviously, it wasn't. Like one of the reasons, one of the things that I'm always very trying to dial in with my clients is the difference between like leadership and dictatorialness, right? Like a leader doesn't dictate. A leader listens and takes a decision and brings people along and serves the people that he's taking care of. And I think historically, within, maybe 100, 200 years ago, within kind of traditional relationships, men were more dictatorial. And that's what led to feminism in the first place, I think, is because men, they were too far the other way, and that's not healthy either. So I do think there's good stuff to be taken from modern society, of course. I do think that the fact that women have some level of autonomy is actually very good and very healthy. Women, you do see it here that as I said, death is much more palpable here in Indonesia for a number of reasons. And if a husband dies, it's like the whole family is and the woman's got kids, the whole family is screwed. You know, it's up to their siblings or their parents to try and, you know, help out in that scenario, and they're already, you know, under pressure themselves financially, and it can really mess up a family, you know, can destroy a whole generation. But all the kids get completely messed up because they sometimes then have to drop out of school and have to go work, you know, or they're street kids and they're begging because they have no choice, right? So the fact that women have more autonomy, I will say, actually, like, the whole idea that women could never work is a bit bullshit, though. women have always historically worked to some degree. It's not like they were just locked up in the home, but
it's some, I'm convinced it's some upper middle class, like, Brit thing that
pretty
also
much
in the case in the US, you know, WASPs as well in the US, where you had this upper middle wealthy families that it was all, you know, it wasn't the life of any sort of regular people in the working or you know, merchant class. Would always be doing things. Yeah, it's you know, farm life. Oh yeah, woman, she's just gonna chill. You know, division of labor.
Yes, no, yeah.
But everybody's working.
For sure. And I mean, I would say, like, the the washing machine and dishwasher did more for women's rights than anything else, right? Because, you know, again, here people don't have as many white goods. So, like, it's up to women to you know, somebody needs to cook, somebody needs to clean, somebody, you know, you can't just let your house fall into disrepair, right? Someone needs to wash the clothes.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, but these things are obviously, you know, there are positives to be taken from it, is my point. There's good stuff, there's bad stuff, and we can't just turn back the clock. We've got to be able to kind of thread the needle and try and take the reality of what needs to be done. You know, take the reality of, like, you know, women are not happy in a relationship where a man isn't leading. Whether they say then they want that, in reality they don't.
Right.
Like, you just see this time and time again. Like, they'll leave the guy who doesn't take care of that element of their needs, right? Because that's part of their needs. They want someone that they can fall back on in times of hard. And it doesn't mean that women aren't capable of, you know, dealing with hard stuff, but they just need that support in a way that men don't to the same degree. But we also need it. We also need emotional support. We need someone to help bring out that side of our character, which otherwise I think most men will repress if they don't have that feminine muse around them to help them break through and kind of develop themselves more. So it's always really hard to talk about these things in a way that kind of makes sense and takes on all the context, because everything as well is multivariate, you know, within society. Like, it's like, even within this conversation, I've jumped from about here to here to here to here, because all these things impact it, right? And it's almost impossible to really articulate it all in one cohesive argument. So yeah, it's about finding the right path. And even within relationships, I'm sure you see this, different, like, not every relationship's the same. Different women want different things from their men. Different men want different things from their women. Like, some women want a super dominant guy who's gonna kind of boss them around a bit. Some women hate that. Mm-hmm. And it depends on their character to a degree as well. Like, so some women want a guy who still leads but is a bit softer. Some women want someone who's a bit harder. Some men want a more independent woman who's more capable of, you know, taking care of herself. And some men want a woman who relies on them a bit more. Yeah. So it's all nuanced. It's all different, which is why, you know, Twitter, the way it is, everything has to be an absolute. Can sometimes, I think on the cultural level it's good, but on the individual level can sometimes cause harm as people misinterpret things. This is something that I always get with my clients. They read one tweet and they're like, oh, well, you said this. It's like, yes, I did say this, but, like, within one environment, this is correct. Right. And within a slightly different environment, there's a bit more nuance to it. But
well, I mean, Jack, the thing that, you know, people got to understand is that these guys are simply built different.
Of course.
I'm still recovering from some laryngitis here, so
So good.
So that actually springs off of I feel like the answer is kind of already here, but I maybe flesh it out a bit. So in one of the big things, okay, the manosphere is always talking about a woman's got to cook and clean, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's a question. Okay, in a more like, developing country, that's, as you said, kind of a requirement, because otherwise things just don't simply function. It's division of labor stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in a more developed country, you have appliances that take care of more of this stuff. You got delivery services, even, you got the question here is, how much does it still matter for a woman to cook and clean in the developed world?
So for me, I always say the more important thing is that you have defined roles, right? I think that's more important, where you both have your jobs that just like, it just reduces friction, reduces tension, where you're not always negotiating like every day over who's doing what, right? So it's more important that like, okay, like I cook, right? So in my house, I do most of the cooking, because I genuinely quite enjoy cooking. I'm reasonably good at it, and like I like to take care of our diet. Whereas my wife does nearly all of the cleaning, right? Because I'm not the most conscientious man. That's just not my it's not my forte. Let's say it's not my character. But we both have our understanding of what it is that we need to do within the house. So there's no confusion. There's not like, okay, why didn't you do this? Like, no, it's just like, okay, at night I take out the bins. It's just my job. I don't have to think about it. I just do it. And it's just reducing that friction and being aware of what we need to do. Now, sometimes we have to negotiate these things, okay, like timings, and like we have like, if I have, like today, I've got quite a few coaching calls, my time's going to be a little bit shorter. We have to do a bit of negotiating, a bit of communicating about what needs to get done and how some of us need to take different slack, or my wife has to do something with our son that means, or has to go do something that means I have to take care of our son, right? More in that scenario. I think that's more important. Now, I will say that I do think I do think that women are better at cleaning than men. I just think they are so. For example, when I clean stuff, and this is something that I hear often within relationships, and not always, some men are more conscientious than others, again, so it depends, on your character. But often if I'll clean something, it's not to the standard that maybe my wife wants. And I hear this in other places, like they have a certain specific standard that you can't meet because of your character or because of who you are. If you look at who does certain jobs, in general, women make better secretaries because they just have better eye for details and picking up small things and being able to make sure that this doesn't get missed and get done on time, better at organizing their time because they're not getting lost in big picture thinking, which is something that, I do, and I think a lot of men do. We wander around and we don't notice things that women notice. I'm sure some of the listeners listening to this, if you're in a relationship, there'll be times where your girlfriend, your wife will be like, did you not just see that? It's like, no. I just didn't notice it. I was away thinking about something else, and that's just not a priority for me. It's just not in my field of vision. It's there, but it's not what I'm focusing my attention on. So there is an element that I do think it's some people are better suited to certain roles. But again, exactly how that manifests doesn't really matter as long as both parties are happy and it's working and it's functioning, right? You don't get lost in the details. Like, okay, women have to cook. Like what? So like if your wife's sick, you're just going to eat takeout. Like, if your wife's pregnant and she's got, she's feeling really uncomfortable at the time. I think a lot of these guys as well, you can tell that they've never had kids. They've never been in that kind of scenario where everything goes out the window at that point because it's such a big change and there's such a a lot of different roles that you have to take, and you have to take care of your wife. She's not in the same condition she normally is when she's pregnant. That throws things out the window. And what, you're just going to say no? You still have to cook. Like when she's feeling weak and sick and she needs more sleep than normal, you're just going to let your house go to shit. Like it's not wise. So it's more about what works and making it work and being able to communicate well, that says, okay, this for me is important. Okay. And I'm not good at this, and I think you need to do this, or, and being able to work these things out between you in a way that works. And that's part of what leadership is, right? It's leading that communication and leading the fact that we're gonna sort this out. Maybe there's a problem in this negotiated process. Instead of saying, okay, this is causing a problem, let's find a solution, right? What's the best way to fix this? And if that means you cook sometimes, if that means you clean sometimes, that's actually a better expression of your masculinity than saying, no, I don't clean. Like, what are you for? Like, come on. Like,
just next her, bro. Don't be a beta, just next her.
Exactly.
Wife just had your kid, just next her.
Yeah, some of that stuff is just ridiculous. Like, I do think a lot of it's engagement bait. I do think there is an element of that, but yeah, I guarantee these guys that are super alpha are not living like that. There are some people who are like, some people are born like that. Like, Tate is not an act.
Of course.
You know what I mean? Like but other people, I'm not so sure. Yeah,
and even if it's not an act, it's kind of an affected behavior. What's the lifeline of it? How long are they going to do that and be happy with it? I mean, the way I look at it is it's very much, it go back to locker room kind of stuff. I mean, a lot of these, they're just kids. Like, really, a lot of them are just kids. And you know how teenage boys, it's always like dick swinging competitions, and a lot of them just really want to show off. Hey, look at me, look at me. And they'll try to convey it like this is it's just so effortless. But I look at some of these tweets, I'm like, this is the first time something like this happened to the guy. It said how it's like, I gotta go tweet it, I gotta put it out there, people are gonna now look at me, and I'm now alpha status confirmed. Get him the blue check, and the red check for the red. Yeah. Speaking of all this stuff, all right, so here's one of the more controversial ones. Love whacking the hornet's nest on this one. Hopefully none of your friends back home are going to watch this one. I hope not. I want you to be honest, okay?
Yeah.
Is there, because you're saying, growing up, that everybody kind of thought feminism was bullshit, and I presume with that statement that even the women were kind of like whatever about it. Maybe a little bit more lip service, but not really much in practice. And how different are the women in Southeast Asia from the women in the UK? Pros, cons.
Oh, hugely. Like even within that, like, I say that most people think that feminism's bullshit. It's like, when I say that, like, all women are still in the West are affected by feminism. Like, all of them. It's like, even if you think you're not, and you think you're some super trad woman, you're not, believe me. Like, if I compare my mother-in-law to any of the trads on Twitter, it's like, y'all don't come close to her. Like, and my wife's mom literally stayed at home, had 5 kids, and like cooked and cleaned every day, took with 5 kids with no appliances, stayed at home, and then as soon as the kids were old enough, built a business, and then now they're in a good financial position because her dad took care of shop when they were kids, and they got by. And then once the kids were old enough to kind of look after themselves a bit more, they built their own business and now they're reasonably, financially secure. That's what a real traditional woman does, and doesn't moan about it, just does it. Doesn't not even moan about it, doesn't want, like acclaim for doing this. That's just what you do, right? And feminism has obviously, Western liberal values has spread throughout the world, has obviously influenced people in Asia as well, right? It's not the same as that. But in general, Asian women are far more understanding that they have a specific role to play within the home. They understand that they should support their man, and that sometimes their man needs taken care of a little bit, and a little bit of looking after. The idea of serving your husband within the home is something to be proud of. It's something that when you're in a social setting, women will do with their husbands to kind of show their pride in their husband and show that they're proud of him and they love him. They will, in a social setting, you don't go and get your own food here. Your wife comes and gets it for you and gives it to you in a social setting, because that's part of what you're doing. It's part of your pride. And if you don't do that, it's disrespectful, and it's actually disrespecting your husband, and you're signaling that you don't care about him. You don't care about his well-being. And obviously it doesn't mean that throughout life we're just, we're sitting there like some king, on the throne, and our women are just, just massaging our feet and just getting on with it. But if you are tired and you're exhausted and you've had a long day and your feet are aching, they'll relieve some of that burden, right? Whereas I think in the West that would be considered demeaning. Women would consider that demeaning, as rather than and again, it comes back to this act of service. While I say that leadership is service, that's what a good leader is. A good leader is, as a man, you should serve your woman. If she's in the same situation, you should do the same thing. You should take the burdens off her through maybe doing some cleaning in that scenario, which normally she would do if she's tired, or she's exhausted, or she's got to do something. It's the same with women. They have to be able to serve their man, to take the burdens off him. And it's this, it's a very collaborative effort, right? It's something that you do together to make each other's lives easier. Whereas in the West, there's this perspective that it is somehow combative. Right. Serving the other person is combative. That therefore, oh, you want me to do this for you, what's in it for me kind of attitude. And there is these, unconscious strings that get attached, which I'm sure is something you deal with as well in your own work with clients. It's a very common thing. But it is very different. There's the expectations and the understanding of what's expected, and that you have roles to play. You have things that you're expected is probably not the right word, but there are, your husband will have needs, you will have needs, and you are there to help them take care of those needs, right?
Well, yeah, expectations are an interesting word. I mean, they get a really bad rap, right? And I think a lot of people will say that expectations are the root of resentment and a lot of dynamics. But here's the flip side, right? Expectations are also things that you can fall back on.
Yeah.
So you guys, you want to do things for the other person when you're feeling, good about them. But when you're not, then sometimes it's, knowing that there's a level of duty there actually has a fail-safe mechanism to it, where it stops a resentment cycle from building. Because, you get into a fight and then she comes and still brings you the plate, right? And then you're like, okay, I love you.
Diffuses the tension, right?
Yeah, it diffuses the tension rather than it becoming this sort of cycle. So those are some of the things, okay, that women do. What are the things that men are expected to do? Because we talk a lot in the manosphere about all this stuff that women in the West don't do for men anymore. And look, I am of the opinion that, as I think you are, there is, a lot, men are kind of to be blamed for stuff. But flip side is women are also pretty overwhelmed as well in the West. And as you showed, I mean, with your mother-in-law, it's not necessarily a matter of the workload. It's a matter of their relationship to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're not getting something now that perhaps they were getting before. What do you see different in the dynamics in Asia, not just in terms of how the woman acts towards the man, but how the man acts towards the woman?
In general, it's there is a very much a provider kind of role where the man is absolutely, especially here in Indonesia, which is, a Muslim country, the man is absolutely. Thailand's a bit different, right? Thailand's a weird country. It's Buddhist, and it's taken, because of the Buddhist permissiveness, it's kind of taken the more degenerate aspects of Western culture very much to heart. But whilst maintaining very much its own culture. So it's not like when you're in Thailand, it doesn't feel Western at all, but then it's very sexually degenerate. But I think in general, they're just more permissive about that and stuff. Whereas here, that's definitely not the case, right? Like there's no, like, casual sex is not a thing here. People have relationships, have sex within relationships and get married very young. But everyone's got a boyfriend or a girlfriend, but no one's just having one night stands in Indonesia. I mean, some people are, obviously, but just in general. But in terms of what men need to do, very much leadership within the home and providing and working. It's very much, if a man doesn't work here, it is seen as pathetic. It's like, even it is better you go and you drive a bus, or like they have these things called angkots, which are kind of like little vans, public transport. It's better you go out and do that and work for 10 hours a day than just sit in your ass and do nothing. And that is just absolutely unacceptable. But it's also being able to lead and take control, right? Leadership within the home, making decisions. One thing that's very common here is like women don't really drive here. Like men, as a man, if you're in a relationship and your wife, your girlfriend has to go somewhere, you're expected to drop them off. Mm-hmm. Like that's part of your role, is, and part of that is keeping them safe, right? It's the roads are dangerous. I always say driving is the most dangerous thing we do every day. People seem to forget how dangerous driving is. And it's this expectation that as a man, you're supposed to provide and get her there safely and drop her off and then pick her up as well at the end. And obviously now there's like Grab, which is like the Uber out here and stuff, which takes a bit of that if it's too much, time pressure. But things like that, and that's part of your act of service, right, to her. It's like, as the man, you're not just waited on, right? You have roles, you have duties to perform as well. That's one that springs to mind. And the other thing is being able to, a big part of being a man here is being someone that your wife is proud of as well. Women get a lot of their own value out of what their husband is doing, who their husband is, how his character is. His character, by the way, is more important than his status, right? If you're respected, that's very important. And that's something that you need to be as a man. You need to be respected by other men. Mm-hmm. That's very important. And part of that is, job and income. If you're able to provide well, that's part of it. But it's also just being wives. There's a man in my wife's family who's one of the most respected men in there, and he's not well off at all, but he's very wise. He's a pastor, but a pastor in Indonesia is not, you're not getting huge donations like you are in America, and you're not well off. It's something you do for service, right? To serve, and he's probably the most respected man in the family, and he's even quite young in general. There's also age plays a part in that. And that's something that you need to be. as a man. You need to be someone that your wife is proud of. And that puts pressure on you to perform. And that's part of being a man. The burden of performance is on you. You have to do it. And men that fail at that, they're the people who really struggle here. And there will always be men that fail that, unfortunately. That's just reality. But they're what come off the top of my head. I'm sure there's other things that if I had a bit more time to.
Yeah, so it's just so interesting how you can see the breakdown, because then you have in the West, I mean, how many guys are doing absolutely fucking nothing?
Way too many.
Yeah. Really, and I don't like to say, I actually don't like to say anti-lazy, because I think that a lot of guys have a bad relationship with work and rest. And so I had a conversation with a mentor years back that changed a lot for me about deconstructing laziness, so to speak. But I have a hard time thinking of a word that would be more applicable in the situation. A lot of these guys that just don't like they have no motivation.
Yeah, lack of ambition, and
yeah,
I think motivation is probably the better word, actually. Yeah.
And so you see them, just listless and weed porn. So okay, so here's an interesting thing to jump off of. The alpha playboy, right? What you described about the men that women would be looking for, this is very much like men that other men would admire. Every woman would want to have. Where does this sort of playboy thing come into the picture? Because you have this thing, and look, it is a real phenomenon of the bum, lazy kind of drug dealer, sloppy, crappy environment, getting laid and hooking up with girls, no problem. Obviously, not every guy does, but it's like especially when you're in your 20s, it's not much of a inhibition for women over there. Is that where does that come from in your perspective? Does it exist out in Asia, but it's suppressed by other men or other women? What's your take on it?
So again, I will say there's definitely a divide here between like Thailand and Indonesia, and I do think there is like I do think those men do add value and do provide some value to women. It's just not necessarily it's kind of an abstraction, if you know what I mean. Like it's women like maybe get some excitement, or there's an element of not like if they are a drug dealer, right? There's an element of an element of almost like fame in that regard. They have a kind of niche kind of fame within a certain group, right? They have social status, right? It's probably a better way of putting it, within certain groups which have high cultural capital in the West. I used to be part of the clubbing scene, and there is a cultural capital attached to that that's attractive to women. But in Asia, that doesn't hold the same cultural capital, right? So being a partier or a clubber is like something to be kind of ashamed of or embarrassed by. It's like it's not something to be proud about like it is in the West. Like people will literally brag about their drug use or how many drugs they take on a weekend, like as if that's anything to be proud of. It's like, well done, your liver can metabolize these things without you dying. I mean, great. But within Thailand there is an element of that for sure, because Thai culture as well is quite. So you talk about laziness, it's a very lazy culture. with very little pride in their work. I think there's a definite difference between Abrahamic countries and Buddhist in this case countries. Is a different work ethic, a different value hierarchy. But here in Indonesia, that kind of archetype of the playboy doesn't really exist at all. Now, there are sugar daddies.
Mm-hmm.
There are rich older men who I always hesitate to use the word prostitution, but there's economically deprived women in this area who will, they get things that they otherwise would never be able to get, in return for this. So the sugar daddy phenomenon is very, very real. And in general, Muslim men, I think, are less loyal than Christian men, in my opinion. There's a cultural difference in terms of how the religions are practiced in that regard. Obviously, polygamy is acceptable within certain bounds in Islam, whereas it's not in Christianity. And that does lead to this idea that they call it like jajan, which means like snacking in Indonesian. It's like there is this context that men kind of like are okay to snack on the side, like it's like just seen as part of what being a man is. That doesn't mean it's acceptable. It doesn't mean that like women like it. It just means there is an element of that going on. But it's very much like you'll have a mistress, right? It won't be like in the West where it's just like you'll pick up a girl on a night out or something. But playboys in general, like young playboys, that's not a status at all here. That's not something that has cultural capital attached to it. So it's very rare that people will do that, if you know what I mean.
Now, do you think, so that's interesting, I mean, because obviously women are drawn towards whatever the sort of cultural milieu is, right?
Yes.
But is there an element here of, if a guy were to interact with a woman in a certain way without social scruples kind of watching, would she she would respond to it, presumably. She might not, depending on how much time the guy had and other kind of, all sorts of little variables. But I guess what I'm trying to get to here is, it sounds like the way that the sexual hierarchy is very economic.
Yes.
Very economic, or, based on your social network, which is kind of a universal. But that whole structure almost like oppresses game, because if you think about it, if the social structure doesn't want a guy, wants women to value these certain things, if a guy kind of tries to sneak in and get a girl, he doesn't have that stuff, he's gonna get the shit kicked out of him, right? By brothers and fathers, and so there's like a very much of a policing attitude against that kind of behavior in Indonesia.
Yeah.
Say that?
And yeah, definitely. And like I would also kind of tie this back to what we talked about before about like luxury beliefs. In some ways, like game is almost like a luxury. It comes with the abundance that we have in the West. We have to find new angles to add value, right? Or different angles to add value. Here, like marrying the right person is the difference between literally living in a shack and living in a house.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that is hugely valuable. In the West, it's the difference between, living in a 4-bedroom house and a 3-bedroom house. You know what I mean? Is that there's less value attached with it. So we have to find different angles to create that value, right? Because that's that are kind of less tangible, if that makes sense. And obviously that doesn't mean like game is never useful here. Like the way you treat your wife still matters. It's part of, game is, I always just like to say, it's just good social skills. And the guy who has good social skills and get on with people is going to be more respected than the guy who's a loser and is therefore still going to have good good values. It's just the way it's expressed is differently, or the way you use it is different, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about, like you say, like sneaking in and trying to take a girl away from someone. That's just not going to happen here. It's not culturally acceptable. I had something else I wanted to go with this, and it's slipped my mind now. I've forgotten it now. There was another angle I had on this, but it's slipped into the ether.
If it comes back, just cut in with it. I did want to ask about Thailand, though. I've obviously heard some stories. I haven't been myself personally, but I know that like prostitution is obviously pretty heavy, and there's a big sex tourism industry there, probably the biggest in the area, although I know Vietnam and the Philippines have some themselves. But then there's also the ladyboy thing that goes on too. So what do you think? I mean, you mentioned the Abrahamic religions versus Buddhism, but is there something, is that, does that explain it? Is there, what exactly is going on in Thailand? Because it's almost as if, and I think, it's Thailand, and then you can also see it to an extent in some of these other countries too, where there's almost this like, hey, just, give up your daughters for, like, I almost look at the ladyboy thing as like a derivative of like cuckolding kind of thing. It's kind of like you have these men who are watching other guys like fuck, like the girls are so real libertine with it, and so transactional, and especially with foreigners. Do the local do the local boys just also be like, okay, I'm gonna do the same thing? I don't know. What's your experience in the country?
So I've got a lot of thoughts on the ladyboy thing, right? Because it's really, really weird there, because it's not just like for foreigners, right? It's just a cultural phenomena in the country, like a real cultural phenomena. And I think part of the like sex tourism and sex, prostitution, sex work is all, I hesitate to call it. I don't like calling it sex work. It's prostitution. Like let's not change the language to make it sound something it's not, sound more palatable. It's prostitution. Is something that's not just found in like tourist areas, right? Like where I lived, I wasn't living in a tourist area. There were expats that tourists did visit, because tourists basically visit everywhere in Thailand pre-COVID. And in our area, it would be like there's still like big red light districts, like just out in the country, right? Like on like trucking lanes where the vans go, and in like small. There was a hot spring that I used to visit regularly, and on the way to the hot spring, you'd pass a whole strap of like an area which is just a prostitute area out in the middle of nowhere. There's like 4 kind of like night motel things like next to each other, that there's no Westerners going there. Yeah. It's not expensive, and for example, the hot spring is not some huge tourist destination. It's like I saw one other white person there in the 3 or 4 years that I was going to that hot spring ever. It's not like it was a tourist destination. And some people argue as well it's from the Vietnam. Thailand was R&R for Vietnam vets, but even before that, there has to have been some cultural acceptance for it. I'm not 100% sure of why there's so much prostitution there. But the ladyboy thing, I mean, I can go into a whole diatribe on that if you want, because it's something that I've thought about a lot while living there. Because so I taught in a school. Before I did this full time, I was a teacher teaching English in a school in Thai schools. And I worked in 2 different schools, and one in a city and one in a very rural area. And you've got kids as young as 12, 13 who are already like ladyboys and identifying themselves as ladyboys. And it's completely acceptable, right? It's not seen like a problem. It's just, it's just something that's going on. And I've tried talking to numerous Thai people about, why is this? Like, why is there so many, ladyboys like here in Thailand? And nobody's got an answer for you. So I had to kind of, that's something else about Thai culture. It's not very critical thinking heavy.
Lazy thinking too.
Lazy thinking, and it's like the Thai people are a monarch stream, and it is a monarchy, and it's very much like that. I think there's been a cultural creation of a very docile people. Essentially, they're just very docile in general, and don't think about things, and just look for pleasure, and very easily manipulable people in general. And yeah, they what I think it is kind of three main areas. Number one is the schooling system for sure. Number two is parenting, and I think number three as well is some element of diet and chemical exposure as well. So
that's interesting.
So yeah,
what kind of chemical exposures happen in Thailand?
So the number one thing is, I'm sure I think you're probably, well, the famous Alex Jones quote, the frog's gay. Yeah. So that's about atrazine, right? Yeah. And Thailand is the country that uses the most atrazine in the world.
Really?
Number one. Yeah. I don't think, again, like I was saying earlier, everything's multivariate. I'm not saying it's just like one thing that explains everything, right?
It's been for a long time before.
Yeah. And people use it in other countries as well, and they don't have the same ladyboy problem, so it can't be the sole explanation. No, there's a lot of plastic, microplastics in food, everyone, but again, that's just Asia in general. A lot of sugar, a lot of, bad diet in general, in Asia again, but particularly in Thailand, a lot of sugar. Everything's got huge amounts of sugar, and even savory dishes are sweet, and then the schooling system, kids in Thailand from sort of 2 to 3 years old, they're already in school. They're already in like preschool for like 8 to 12 hours a day. So they're immediately taken out of the home as early as possible. People in general don't want kids there as well. Like, it's very much seen that a child is a burden, and it's something that you kind of have to do for your family rather than because you want to do it. And that attitude obviously filters through to kids, whether you expressly tell them that or not, they're going to feel that. And Thai homes are very cold. I have been friends with a fair few Thai people. I've been involved, been in their houses, and it's just not a warm, loving environment. And kids are seen as a burden, and then they're not given much attention in the home. They're at school all day. They start school at like 7:30, but then you've got to travel there. You've got to get there before that. So you're leaving the house in some cases at 5 a.m. to get to school because the bus is there. That's when the bus picks them up to go to school. They live quite far away. And then they're at school, doesn't finish till 4 p.m. And then obviously you've got to get home, and often they'll have like after school activities in the evening while their parents are still at work, and they come home and they just get no attention from their parents. So they are really crying out for attention. And one of the ways that you can really get attention from female teachers in the school is by acting out and being a ladyboy.
Yeah.
So a lot of the ladyboys in the school are smart kids. You will get more ladyboys in the smart classes than you will in the dumb classes, right? And they are the kids who got a bit of intelligence, and they want some attention, and they know by acting a certain way, they'll get a smile out of the teacher. They'll laugh. The teacher will laugh at them. They'll think it's cute. They'll think it's funny. And this is the way that they get the attention they're lacking in the home. They're lacking within the schooling system, because you've got 40 kids in the class, right? So if a kid doesn't give you a reason to talk to him, you're just not going to talk to him. You logistically don't have time, right? So you get these quiet kids who just sit there in the corner, and you never talk to them ever, because it's like you got 50 minutes, you got 40 kids. With the best will in the world, I've got a minute per kid. You know what I mean? So they get the attention through this, and then they internalize that, and then it becomes something that that becomes their identity, right? So that's my pet theory of why. And then, but there's obviously other things involved in it. There is some Thai culture that believes that you can have like a female spirit, like, you know, the kind of like, what's that thing they call it in the West now, is like sexual, like, when they call it, what is it? Like when one day you're a woman, the next day you're a man. You know, you've got two spirits inside you or something. There's one of the transsexual, one of the transsexual beliefs. They're the they. You know, if they're a they,
check my
that's what they
dictionary
believe.
of all the different terms they came up with.
But that's a phenomenon, a cultural phenomenon within Thailand, which I believe is within some kind of like some kind of like mythology within the country, which I think is also
open
kind of
I think I understand that it gave a culturally acceptable vector for this thing to spread with the right pressures. It's interesting. It's certainly a shame, because you know that it couldn't have always been like that.
Oh no, it was not. Yeah.
Wow. So tracking back to guys in the West, you know, who are
bit off topic, yeah.
You know, no, but I mean, it is connected because, you know, how did it happen to Thailand, right? Well, I mean, there's some stuff growing here. We don't have to go into it in detail. Do want to keep the video up, but men in the West are certainly facing some difficult decisions, I guess you could say. Or let me put it this way: what are guys in the West today to do? What are they to do? How are they supposed to pull themselves together to be able to deal with this? And what should they do? You know, how do women fit into this whole picture too?
So do you mean in terms of like resisting kind of that cultural change that's happening, or do you mean in terms of their relationships? Or
more in terms of the relationships, just because the audience is male? But I mean, I am actually interested at what women can do as well. But you know, I as we both know, male leadership is an important part of this. So if men, you know, the burden falls to men to stop, you know, the West from becoming like Thailand, so to speak.
Yeah.
What to do?
I think the number one thing is to take control of your own immediate environment. I don't think there's anything much more you can do than that. There is, but that's the first step, is to immediately take control of your immediate environment, which first of all means yourself. Like that's your most immediate environment, is take control of your own thought patterns, your own behaviors, be able to, if you notice these trends or you have these kind of bad habits, is to fix them first. And this is why to track back, the red pill stuff is important, because all that self-improvement stuff is really, really at the heart of that. You need to have that base level of self-improvement before the rest of it comes. The second thing after that is to start trying to influence the people around you, right? Trying to be a model that people can follow. And it doesn't mean, doesn't mean going around trying to red pill people, like force down true, things that are true that people aren't ready for. Yeah, it's to be wise enough to understand when people are ready for that, but also to realize that most people aren't, and you've got to kind of butter them up first. And part of buttering them up is to live your life in a certain way that opens their hearts to the idea that maybe the way that you're living is better.
Yeah.
I think this is to go to a completely unrelated point. This is how I personally practice evangelism, which is, as a Christian, I'm supposed to be an evangelical, even though I don't like the way that a lot of Christians practice evangelism. puts me off, and I'm a Christian, let alone, non-Christians. So this is how I personally practice that, is you've got to lead as being salt and light in your immediate environment. And then when people are ready, you have to try and, help them up and help the people around you to get better. And that can be things like their diet, self-improvement, their relationships, whatever it is, these things that improve. And then hopefully within time, you create a group of people that can trust each other, and you have a small network, right?
Yeah.
You have a small cell, as it were, of people who, believe certain things and have good aspirations and healthy goals for the country and for your immediate environment. And then you try and leverage that in some regard, whatever that might be. And that can be things like getting on Twitter and, influencing the cultural zeitgeist. It can be, in the US, you got the whole school board thing going on, of people trying to retake control of school boards. In the US, you've got good avenues for that because it's so democratic, right? We don't have that in the UK. It's not, everything's voted for in the US. So start, if you're in the US, start doing things like that. If you're in the UK, your avenues are a bit more limited, but it can be, creating businesses and then funneling money back into certain areas, or having business values that are contra to the cultural narrative and give people another option, a view of things that they might. There's many different ways you can do it, right? And then in terms of relationships, I think the main thing you can do is just be the best man you can be and create boundaries. And the women that are going to respond well to those boundaries that you have are going to be the ones you're going to want to spend time with, and you're going to have a good chance of having a relationship with. And then and if more men do create those boundaries, by the way, and women don't get access to the sexual marketplace in the way that they want, and they suddenly stop dictating the sexual marketplace as they do at the moment in the West, then you're going to get shifts in female behavior. But it's up to men to stop simping, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
And yeah, that means probably taking some sacrifice, being strong enough to deal with being alone at times. So that's why, again, it comes back to that first step, which is look after yourself first and get that first step fixed. I think other than that, there's not a huge amount you can do. And it's got to be, the way I see it in terms of political movement is it's got to be the opposite of the Gramscian theory of hegemony, which has basically taken over the West. Instead of Marxists, leftists, communists infiltrating our institutions and exacting long change over a long timeline, we kind of have to do the same, and we have to do a counterinsurgency, and retake control of these institutions from the inside, repopulate them, use cancel culture to our advantage, and get these leftists out of positions of power, because that's how they use it, by the way. They use it to remove people who are in positions of power who are not part of their cultural milieu. They get rid of the milieu, they get rid of them, and then repopulate it with their own people. We need to use their own weapons against them. This is war. Okay, power. This is power, right? This is about power. This is about cultural dominance. This is about what's good for our society, what's good for the people within our society, because ultimately, the current cultural climate we're in is terrible for men, for women, for the society at whole. I mean, just look at what's gone on in the past few years. It's the reason that COVID restrictions were able to be enacted is because in these positions of power were people that are owned, people that subscribe to this worldview and can be pushed in a certain way. So we need to reconquer that and realize that this is, to some degree, a battle, right? Yeah. Politics is war. Politics is it's just another battlefield, right? So even though I personally don't get involved in that, I have a different, my role is not that. That's what we need to do. And I know some people do have that. I know there are smart men in our scene who, doesn't it? Yeah. So.
Last question, because I feel like my voice is getting super tapped and
understood.
So you were talking about, these guys, these future leaders of the world, these men orchestrating the pushback, they're by creating these boundaries and by not accepting certain behavior from women, women will start to change their behavior. And I agree with that entirely. And let's be honest, it happens faster than people realize. Because women are always drawn towards the best men.
Yep.
So if the best men say, fuck your system, we're not going to basically act as if, or believe the things you're supposed to, it starts to create a lot of dissonance with women because, and you see this for sure happening. I can tell you for sure in the States, where women are really uncertain at this moment because they are still being told by mass media that they should believe certain things and that they're, we're with the majority, right? But then you actually have, they're meeting guys and the guys, and they're great guys, and they're like, that stuff's bullshit. I'm not dealing with that stuff. And then the woman's kind of in this position of dissonance. Some are going to self-destruct, some are going to jump. I already know many who have jumped. So is that the main way that you would recommend guys do it? Because it a lot of it is also about being in the right place, being willing to tolerate even a woman who's, how far down did she go? That path. She wants to take the redemption arc. Do you find it to be a reasonable avenue, especially given the sense that, our community has a very massive global impact on consciousness and belief, but the number of individuals on it who maybe are consciously aware and awake is relatively small. So you could, you and I are talking, having a great conversation, we're on the same page, and you're in Indonesia, right? And I'm in New Jersey. It's so is it a worthwhile strategy for guys to go after the e-girl? Because the e-girl, that you see the movement of women in real time to the manosphere. I mean, I've been in that online community since 2015, and man, I mean, it's an exponential rise in women. It's almost like, can you, I guess it's still a majority men, but we're losing, we're gradually even losing the majority, you know what I mean? Pretty soon we're gonna have all the women, it's like, and the rest of the guys are gonna be left on Reddit, right? That's gonna be the incels on Reddit, ironically. No, but in all seriousness with the question, is this sort of internet dating a viable strategy for guys? Not like even standard online dating with swiping for the apps, but this social media online dating, is it a viable strategy for guys? Or are most of these women just, mentally ill?
So I think there's a few different angles to take on that. Like, obviously there are some in that scenario, and some of it is kind of like a masculinization. Actually, they want to be down with the boys, right?
Yeah.
And they want to be part of the boys, which is always something to be. So on the one hand, even I'm very much like the girls who are involved in this space. I think they want the right thing. I think they do want, they do that willingness to want to do something better. They think this is better. In and of itself is a really important attitude to have, even if they're maybe not quite at the point they think they are, or they still have work to be done. The fact that they're willing to do that and they kind of understand that there's problems and that there's better ways of doing things, I think it is in general, it's good. I don't want to be too derogatory to people to the women in the space. I'm sure there are some who are, definitely there are some who've seen some of the stories who are, this is just another avenue to, maybe to legitimize themselves for their past, or to, it's also a sexual strategy, there's a lot of high value. Yeah, there's a lot of high value men in this space, but that's kind of what we're talking about, right? Is we want to be the ones who are the most attractive men. because that's going to attract women, and then that's going to bring over. And as you mentioned before, women are more consensus based. If they see most women find this attractive, they're going to be like, oh, that's attractive.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing. It's in general, it's a good thing. In terms of actual date, like for guys who want to date these kind of women, I don't have any problem with it at all. As long as you go into it with your eyes open and still vet and still be aware of, potential negative, patterns of behavior, and trying to build out that profile of who this person is. And by the way, like, social media is a great way to do that, because people are always letting their unconscious biases in. They don't realize how much they're saying through what they're not saying, or through what they, through certain presentation of themselves. They're actually telling the world. They're trying to present themselves in one way, but actually, between the lines there, you can read stuff into it, right? So you've got to be aware of that. That can help. But ultimately, like, online dating people through, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, whatever, I just say it's just another way to meet women, right? Don't build it up into this big thing like online dating, like, I've got to date online to meet people. No, it's just another avenue to meet women. It's the same like going to, a dance class. There's going to be women there. Some of them you're going to vibe with, some of them you're not. It's just a way to meet them. It's like same as, approaching women in the street. If you're able to do that, or if you've got the right mentality. I don't think every man's capable of doing that, by the way. It's like, again, it's just another avenue to up the amount of women that you're meeting. And it's like, it should never be one or the other, right? You should be willing to do, whatever you can to try and meet someone that you vibe with. But also it's got advantages. You are selecting for people that probably are culturally aligned with you. You're going to have some value alignment, so that's going to be good. I do think that there's probably, just in general in online spaces, there's tends to be more men than women, so it's going to be quite competitive. So you're still going to have to be at the upper end of the the dominance hierarchy or whatever in that space to really succeed. But again, as we talked about earlier, there are things that you can do to up your value in kind of in more abstract ways, right? Like, your value is not just your earning potential in your muscles. That's part of it, but there's way more to a man's value than that alone. Sorry, red pillars. Going to the gym and earning more isn't going to solve all your problems with women. It will help. I'm not going to lie, it will help. But,
oh yeah. But a lot of no, I was just thinking with I was surprised to know that a lot of these smaller anonymous accounts will date through the like comment sections of the bigger accounts. So there is this kind of like slipstream, like an individual account becomes like a nexus point. Like,
like almost like a matchmaker, right? Kind of like a subconscious, like, not matchmaker, but
like an indirect thing. Because obviously, obviously what you're saying is correct. Like, you want to have a bigger account. The bigger account, I mean, I'm
or at
sure
least be respected, right?
Like, exactly.
Because there's a difference between follow account and influence, for sure.
Correct.
Like, I would say you're way more influential than any other dating coach in our, like, dating account in our scene. Some of these accounts have got 100K followers, but follow account doesn't correlate with influence at all. So
yes, it's not clear cut for sure.
Yeah,
it's not clear cut for sure. It's but I mean, if you have a more influential account,
it's gonna be better.
Yeah, I mean, girls will message you, right? I mean, I think if either of us were single, there'd be a lot of girls. They're already girls in DMs. I mean, they're fine. They're all tasteful. They're asking questions and stuff. But you can see how, if like you were single, how that stuff would go a different direction, perhaps. But yeah, I think it is interesting with I don't know, this it's such a whole new thing, to have these people who live in totally different locations having these, avies, hopefully not anime avies, right? and interacting with each other and maybe dating. Anyway, it's, as I say it out loud, it sounds disturbing, but actually there's a lot of like, I know a lot of these people are really, I poke a lot of fun, but a lot of them are really good people and they're funny. And anyway, well, any last words, Jack? I mean, how can people, talk a little bit about your services, how people can find you, and anything else, any kind of last messages you want to put out there for the guys?
Yeah, sure. I mean, best place to find me is on Twitter at ThinkingPeach. That's where it's the only social media I really use. I started using YouTube myself, and I don't really like making videos, so it's like I will eventually transition into that more. But Twitter is the place to find me, and my newsletter is, if you like, I have a blog, but I don't update it anymore. My newsletter is where you'll find my kind of current up-to-date stuff. 3 emails a week on relationships and dating and some cultural stuff like we talked about a lot today as well with it as well. But it's more dating, actionable relationship stuff that will hopefully help you in your relationships. I'm also currently working on a free video course I'm going to release soon. That's going to be, I think, quite valuable. So keep an eye out for that if you're interested in kind of a bit more kind of dating stuff and like actual strategies. And I'm kind of be isolating four main bottlenecks that guys have in their relationships or their positions with women, and kind of addressing those. I think I could charge for it. I'm not gonna, but I could charge for that. I think it's not going to be super in depth, but I think a lot of people get a lot of value out of it when I release it, hopefully in a couple of weeks.
That's going to be awesome. I don't know other people. I mean, zeroing it down on the bottlenecks are, yeah, that's really good. I'm excited for that. I'm going to get the links. The links are all going to be in the description here. You got to follow Jack. He's doing great stuff. Get on his newsletter, and I appreciate the time.
No, thanks for inviting me on. It's been good. You've been an unconscious mentor for a couple of years, so it's been great to finally connect in person. I've read a lot of your work, so it's good.
Likewise, Jack. I appreciate it. All right, we'll see you guys next time.